Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dave from Strategic Defensive Solutions. Again, we're working on part 2 of our 3-part video series on the review of the Wilson Combat 9mm CQB. The first video we did was an external evaluation of the gun. I kind of introduced you to the firearm and let you know the things that I had done or had done to that pistol and just kind of give you a brief overview. This time, we're going to give this pistol a proctology exam. We're going to get in the guts of it. We're going to talk about what makes these guns what they are and what separates them from their production level counterparts. So without further ado, we're going to just jump right into it here. I want to first address the frame and the slide fit. If we put them together, okay, we still notice that the frame and slide are tight as they were in the first video, but now we have no parts in there, no spring tension in there to kind of hold things together. So if we take the front end of the gun, there's no movement up, down, left or right, okay? Do the same thing in the rear. There's zero movement left, down, up or right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just shake it, okay? There's no audible or felt movement between the two components. You can shake the hell out of it if you want to. It doesn't matter. It's not going anywhere. However, it's not so tight that function is impeded or there's any additional stress on the parts. There's no additional friction because it's too tight. It runs very, very smooth, okay, on its rails. So take a listen to that. Okay, very, very smooth. Obviously, the folks over at Wilson Combat take a good bit of time to lap the rails, okay, of the frame and of the slide so that they run very smoothly together. And this just overall improves the efficiency of the weapon, right? If you have two smooth surfaces working against one another, the end result is going to be efficiency as opposed to two rough surfaces. So that's that, okay? If we take a look at the slide, I'm going to grab the bushing so that y'all can see this. With some of the other makers of semi-custom pistols or manufacturers, they build them so tight that you cannot get the bushing in or out without a wrench, and sometimes you kind of have to use the hammer, or excuse me, the barrel as an anvil to kind of pull that thing out, right? Punch it out. But with the Wilson, it just slips right on in, okay? And you can roll that thing around with one finger. There's no additional stress there, right? But when it's in there, there's zero movement. Like, you cannot move that thing around. It is fit perfectly to the slide, okay? The barrel and the bushing fit is very much the same, whereas when you get it to where it's supposed to be, there is no movement between those two parts, okay? But it runs freely and unencumbered, right? You can just drop that sucker out of there. So there's less stress on that particular part while running just about as tightly as it can possibly run, okay? When we look at, stay on the theme of the barrel here for a second. When we look at what work is done to the barrel, you've got the obvious fitment to the bushing. They also fit the upper lugs, which is totally normal, and lower lugs. But the lower lugs are fit very concisely. You've got wear patterns. You're not going to be able to see that in the video because it's barely noticeable to the naked eye. But the wear patterns on the left and right lower lug or feet are very uniform. So it tells you that those lugs are cut squarely. And what that means is obviously there's a more concise seating of that barrel. It's not canting left or right in battery. Also, they pay a lot of attention to polishing that feed ramp. And that's like a mirror. I don't know if you can get a really good look at that because the camera quality is not the greatest, but it is incredibly smooth. There's not a single machine mark on there. And then if we want to look at how the barrel lower lugs run on the slide stop pin, you can tell those wear marks are pretty concise as well, telling you they're making even contact with that surface, which is what you're looking for, okay? Let's move a little bit forward here and talk about the mainspring housing. Most aftermarket mainspring housings, you kind of just slip into your gun, right? And they move around a little bit, but not a ton. And that's just not the case with this one. This is the one-piece new bulletproof mainspring housing assembly, right? So they obviously fit the rail here for the raceway, filing and all of that good stuff. And you can tell that because it's a very tight, kind of concise fit just to get it to go. Once you get it in there, though, okay, it gets in there and it rides smoothly, right? Those rails have been dressed. Once you have the mainspring housing magazine well in place, you can't move it left or right. You can't force it forward or rearward at all. With some of the aftermarket ones, you can get a little bit of movement left, right, forward, or backwards. So when you get into the trigger and that gun starts running, you can feel that back end moving a little bit. For me, I find it a little bit distracting. So that's another little piece of work that they do that kind of separates them. Okay. In addition to all the barrel fitting, frame slide fitting, all that stuff, these guns basically come out of the box or bag, right, with a full reliability job, as you would expect from a pistol with this price point. They radius the bottom edge of the breech face here, polish that so that it slides, so that the slide slides more smoothly over the disconnector. And they also radius and polish the disconnector head as well as either side of the disconnector so that you don't get that disconnector click. It's kind of a felt and sometimes an auditory click right before the trigger breaks that I find very, very distracting. You don't get that in these pistols. Now we're going to take a look at the ignition components within the firearm, okay, like the trigger, the sear, the hammer, the disconnector, and the leaf spring or sear spring, okay? We're not going to get really technical. I'm not going to go into measurements and all of that. What I'm trying to do here is just show you the additional work that separates a high-end or semi-custom pistol from its production counterpart, okay? First thing we're going to take a look at is the trigger itself. These triggers are oversized. When they pull them out of their packaging, they can't fit them in the frame. You've got to fit this trigger shoe to the frame, okay? And how they do that, right, is by taking a file and then, a stone preferably, and dressing the top and bottom of the trigger shoe until it fits in the frame, okay? And then they polish up the trigger bow, left, right, and rear, right? And you can tell that by, and I know you're not going to be able to see this, but the sheen on the top and bottom, which shows that there was some tool that touched it, right? The added benefit of this is a trigger that not only fits very tightly in its track, there's almost zero movement there. I'm trying to move it up and down, okay? But a trigger that runs freely, right? You don't hear a lot of noise there. In some of the production level pistols, you'll hear a lot of grinding and grit, if you will, in that. But it runs nice and free in its little home, if you will. Then, move this here. If you look at the sear, you'll notice that the sides are very highly polished. As well, the inside of the frame is polished where the sear and the hammer are riding because they are making contact with the inside of the frame on their sides. This allows these parts to pivot inside the frame with reduced friction. Okay, so when you cock that hammer back, you hear the audible click of the sear setting itself, okay? And you don't hear the grinding and the grit that you hear with some of the production level pistols. Also, when you look at the primary angle, which is the top angle, and the secondary relief angle, which is the bottom angle in the sear, I know you're not going to be able to catch this in the video. I apologize for that. You'll notice that they're very precise. They're even from left to right on the top as well as the bottom. All the surfaces that bear with something else are all dressed and stoned appropriately, and they're brought to a high polish. Same thing with the hammer. However, the sides of the hammer are finished, but you can tell it's very, very smooth, and the finish is obviously done over smooth steel. Okay. There are no tool marks present in any of these components, by the way. Now, if you look, again, I apologize for the lacking quality of the video here, but it is what I have. They do stone and dress the hammer hooks. I did not measure the hook height I didn't feel like I needed to because that actually comes on the Wilson Combat quality control checklist. They measure it and they write down exactly what it is at. I've not verified that that measurement is true and correct, but to the best of my knowledge, I would assume that it is, okay? But everything is wearing evenly on the sear and the hammer in relationship to how those two things interact, right? What they don't do is they don't dress the strut here, okay? Sometimes when you buy like a full custom, the strut will be dressed. You know, all the sharper corners of the strut will be dressed. That's really the only thing I have found that's not dressed on this pistol with a stone, at least, okay? When we look at the disconnector, all bearing surfaces of the disconnector are also highly polished. The bearing surface where the disconnector comes in contact with the middle spring on your leaf spring or disconnector spring is polished to a mirror finish. As well, that leaf is also radiused and polished so that those two pieces are running as smoothly as they can together, okay? Which only aids in the overall smoothness of the trigger pull and operation of the disconnector going up and down when it's doing its thing. Okay? It's also dressed and polished where it contacts the trigger bow at the rear and where it rides in and out of the frame in its disconnector hole, right? The top of the disconnector is also radiused and polished. Hopefully you can get a good look at that. You probably can't see the detail, but it's not square and blocky and choppy like some of the others, which allows the slide to run more smoothly against the disconnector so you don't get that hang up. You don't feel that hang up when the slide's moving over the disconnector. Also, the ears, the sides of the disconnector, if you can see that, are beveled in and dressed as well with a stone, which alleviates what's called disconnector click, which is kind of an audible and felt click right before the trigger breaks. And to me, this is a very, very distracting thing. It's one of the first things I identify and fix when I get an out-of-the-box pistol. Not the case here. Let's take a look at the extractor. One of the things that you would do or would be done if you sent your pistol off to a pistol smith to have a reliability job done is they would radius the bottom of the extractor and they would polish it and then radius the hook, or excuse me, polish the hook. I apologize for that. This has already got that done. Again, most of the stuff that you would typically see on a reliability job that would cost you a few $100s if you sent it out are already done to these pistols straight out of the bag. So that's obviously nice to know. And the back of the rear of the extractor is serrated at the same 40 LPI that or lines per inch that the rear of the slide is. So that's just another thing. They're doing this by hand. It takes a little bit of effort. Let's talk a bit about the bulletproof ambidextrous safety. I really like the design of this. There's one detail about this design that I find lacking. I'm not going to go into that here. I've got some conversations going back and forth with Wilson Combat in regards to it. Whether that goes anywhere or not is anybody's guess. But they obviously have changed the geometry of how these things go together, right? Okay, if you take a look at that, you'll notice that it's not the typical split in the middle. They've machined the component and they have the dovetails at either end, which gives it a little more solid feel. You don't get that rocking that you would get in the typical or standard ambidextrous safety. Also, it's retained by a pin held internally, relatively similar to the Kimber ambidextrous, where the pin has a head milled out, right, and it rides in a slot and retains it that way. So you don't have to have the leg that goes underneath in the slot of your grip panel to hold the offside safety in place. All in all, very, very solid design. You get no rocking or anything like that. They obviously fit the tab internally for appropriate function. But this is a really great piece of kit. If you don't have it on your gun and you need an ambi or lefty like me, this is definitely a go-to right here. It's a game changer for sure. I'm not going to go into great detail about the other few parts that I have here, but what I will say is that when you take a look at even the magazine release, you can see that there's some fitting that goes into that, which allows it to be not only positive, but a bit more sensitive. You don't have to depress it so far to get the magazine to shoot back out of that gun, which makes your reloads a little cleaner, a little faster, if you feel the need for speed, right? We're talking about the firing pin stop. Again, the bottom edge radius is polished and dressed. It was finished, so now what you see is the finish wearing off. Obviously, after a few thousand slide racks, that's going to happen. But it's very, very smooth. You don't see chatter marks, in respect to one of the production manufacturers. I'm not going to name names. A buddy of mine and I have a saying that their machine work looks like they just simply use rats on popsicle sticks. But you're not going to find that here. Let's move on to the palm safety, right? Or the beaver tail safety. They obviously fit this where it needs to be fit. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, other than it doesn't generally need to be depressed as far as some of my other pistols to disengage, right? To be able to fire that pistol. So it's a little forgiving in that respect, where if you don't have a perfect handhold, you're probably still going to be doing just fine, because they really run it right at razor's edge, okay? About 30% of depression and this thing will go. So before I part ways with y'all, I wanted to point something out. Not a big deal at all, not even a negative, but Wilson Combat grips, these ones, made by Hogue Manufacturing, okay? Hogue's been making grips for a long time. They've been doing this for, hell, I don't even know how long, forever, right? So again, quality is the sum of the work and the components, right? So if you have a quality craftsman working on quality components, you're going to end up with a quality machine, right? If you have mediocre components or even quality components under mediocre machining tolerances put together by assembly line workers, low skill, low paid assembly line workers, maybe even in another country, you're going to end up with a product that reflects that as well. So word to the wise, spend your money wisely, okay? If you can afford something like this, I say go for it. It's worth every penny. If you can't, just get the best that you can buy. You can always go up from there. Dave, out.